Hi, and welcome back to Dan's Garage and Farm. This is episode 2 of the Allis-Chalmers restoration series. I just wanted to kind of continue on a little bit with the intro because there were some things I left out, some historical facts about the Allis-Chalmers G I wanted to get a little bit more in depth into. The Allis-Chalmers G was made between 1948 and 1955. There was just shy of 30,000 of them made during that time frame. They weigh around 1,300 to 1,400 pounds, and they have they call it a 3-speed transmission with a creeper gear. The creeper gear goes about 1.5 miles an hour, and then third gear goes up to 7 miles an hour. It does have reverse. It was built in Gadsden, Alabama, in the United States. The original price in 1955, the last model year, was $970, so just under $1,000. I'll go a little overview of the engine. The engine was designed and manufactured by the Continental Engine Company as the N62 designation. The engine was not only used in the Allis-Chalmers G, but also in the Massey Harris Pony, the Earthmaster tractors, and other more specialized pieces of equipment like forklifts and some marine applications to power boats. Specifically in the Allis-Chalmers G, there was an A prefix added to the N62. I believe that means Allis-Chalmers version. Where there was a boss either cast into the side of the engine, or mine actually has a braze or bronze piece added on. I think it was done at the factory because there's machining marks into it. It may have been a repair after the fact. It may have been a repair due to a casting defect at the factory as well. But this allowed for the mounting of the starter to the engine. From what I understand, that is the main difference between the A version of the N62 and just the N62. The other versions of the tractor depended upon the starter being mounted into the bell housing of the engine transmission block, and so the starter fed in kind of in the reverse direction of most engines, I believe. The engine is a flathead or an L head design, as opposed to overhead valve designs that were becoming more popular at the time. This design, the L head or the flathead, uses less complicated parts and a less complicated layout, which led to it being more affordable and somewhat easier and cheaper to work on. Although this design does produce less horsepower per square cubic inch of engine displacement. The engine displacement on the N62 is 62 inches in 4 cylinders, and it produces somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 horsepower. Now, a couple of years back, had to replace an engine on my Ingersoll garden tractor. And the engine I chose is 27 cubic inches. It's a single cylinder, less than half the displacement, and it produces 18 horsepower. So double the horsepower, a quarter of the cylinders, and half the displacement. So there's been a lot of engine development since then. But I will say, amongst all that time that has taken place between the last model year 1955 until now, there's still a ton of these tractors around, and people still use them, and there's still attachments made for them that fit them, and I think that it just shows that this tractor design stood the test of time. And there's actually been, I guess people call them clones of the tractor made. So other companies have copied the layout of the tractor and manufactured them on their own. And I know, actually, not far from where I live in Ohio, a company called Ventrac, pretty popular tractor brand for lawn mowing, and they have various attachments that you can put on the front of a Ventrac. It's an articulated style tractor. That company started a division called Tillmor, which if you Google them, maybe I can put a link in here. They do make a replica or a clone of the Allis-Chalmers G today, and they reference the Allis-Chalmers G in their marketing. So it just kind of shows you this design. It is unique and still desirable to this day. So a little more about the engine. The bore and stroke is 2 3/8 inches by 3.5 inches, and the compression ratio is 5.75 to 1. It is liquid cooled. It does not have a water pump. It depends on like a convection circulation with the radiator actually mounted higher than the top of the engine. That gets the hot coolant from the engine to rise up into the radiator, cool down, and then the return line, again, naturally the cool water wants to sink, the hot water wants to rise, so it naturally circulates the coolant in the engine, which is a pretty nice design. Once again, it's reducing parts on the tractor. There's no water pump to go bad. So as long as that is effective at keeping the temperature where it is designed to be, then that's all the better for the end user. Like many tractors of this vintage, it used a Donaldson oil bath style air cleaner. It came with a Marvel, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't know how to say it, Schebler carburetor, a Delco Remy generator and starter, and use Autolite AN7 spark plugs. And then one more detail about it, I'm going to get in and actually show you around the engine, but they labeled the engine, different sides of the engine with names that aren't directional. So it's not called the front of the engine or the back of the engine, because it's kind of confusing in the LSG because the engine is mounted reversed. So traditionally the front of the engine is in the rear now, and vice versa, the rear of the engine is in the front, and then they do designate the camshaft side of the engine from the generator side of the engine. So I'll cut to showing you a clip of me describing that now.
Okay, welcome back. Before we get started on the valve train components and going through that, I wanted to do a little overview of the engine. I saw it in one of the manuals. I can't find it in the ones I printed out, but it kind of cleared up some questions I had in my mind. It might help you. This tractor is kind of an odd one because the engine's in the back, kind of like a car with an engine in the back. There's just not many, and therefore the direction of the engine and what the instructions say and how you orient everything in the engine can be kind of confusing. So anyways, the one manual I saw said to, where'd you go? Are you still there? My front display went black, so I couldn't quite tell if you were gone or not. You're still there, thank you. Please stay. The one manual had a good explanation for it. It said that there's 4 sides to the engine, let's call it. There will be the flywheel side, which is traditionally the rear of the engine. The flywheel side has this big boss on the end for the starter to sit in. Starter goes in, engages with the teeth on the flywheel to start the engine, to turn the engine over, hopefully to start it if you're lucky. And then there's going to be the crank side of the engine, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but that's the traditional front of the engine. But on this tractor, that's the rear of the tractor. It's still the front of the engine, the crank side of the engine for the purposes of what's going on in the manual. But to not confuse you and say the front of the engine, they wanted to designate it as the crank side of the engine, because it is the rear of the engine when it's hooked up to the tractor, and that's probably when most people are working on this thing. Okay, then working to the sides of the engine, you will have the camshaft side. Pretty self-explanatory. The camshaft goes in this side of the engine, and then the generator side of the engine, which when it's fully assembled, once again, probably when most people are going to start digging into this engine, the generator is going to be on this side, as well as the oil filter and the oil filler. So yeah, just wanted to clear that up. Kind of confusing. I don't know if I made it any clearer or I made it more confusing, but you're welcome.
Okay, so hopefully that helps everybody understand maybe the history of this tractor a little more, and the overview of the engine. So it's a little easier to follow along, a little more interesting to follow along when I get my hands dirty, or my gloves dirty, which I promise will be in the next episode. I know I said this episode would be valve train install, but I needed to go through some of this stuff for you to know and to learn. So yeah, next episode, episode 3, will be getting hands dirty, so please follow along, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.